I am, if you haven't already figured out, Lydia Soifer. And I warn you, I warn every group, I will talk till the last man falls. Nothing to me, close the doors, nothing to me like a captive audience. So you're here because you want to learn something. And I'm here because I love to teach. And part of the reason I love to teach is that I really just adore the company of children, with the possible exception of 8th grade boys and girls, but peculiar lot, but I really do. And I am always concerned about the number of hours that our boys and girls spend in school when it's hard for them and when they are invisible. These are invisible conditions. They manifest as behavior so very often and are easy to misinterpret. Alrighty? So what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is this concept of auditory processing. Would you have me turn this on now, sir? Should I start now?
Sure. Is that microphone on too?
Sounds that way.
Thanks.
Alrighty. There are some things that we need to think about. All right? And some of this is very complex information. Rarely is it my nature to stand behind a podium and look at notes. But I'm telling you that this is heavy-duty stuff. That doesn't mean you can't learn it. It doesn't mean I won't make it easier for you. But it's a lot of information. But my job here tonight is to inform and empower you. All righty? So, what is an auditory processing disorder? You want to know. And the answer to that is that it is a complicated experience that our boys and girls have to have, that I wish our teachers were able to understand more about this. Because what we want to do is look at their ability to process, to take in and make sense of verbally presented information, which is what goes on in school all day. So what we're going to do is try and differentiate a little bit between the auditory processing part of things and more global language processing difficulties, because they are not the same thing. And I'll give you all the different levels. So I want you to understand first what processing is. So what I'm going to ask you to do is we can talk about the behavioral and academic examples of what processing entails, but I'm going to give you a visual processing task, and I'm going to tell you in advance that I want you to think by analogy to what it means to have an auditory processing disorder. You ready?
Yeah.
Now, imagine yourself at a traditional desk, and a teacher is showing this picture to all of you boys and girls, and she gives you the following instruction. All right, everybody, look up here. Can you all see this? Can you all see this? Let me see your eyes, boys and girls. Can you see this? Yes, excellent. Okay, good. Now, what I'm going to do is I want you to complete this worksheet. Would you hand out this worksheet for me, please, ladies? Mm-hmm. All right. You have 15 minutes to finish, so please get to work. Everybody take a careful look at that, and here's the worksheet for you to look at. All righty? And part of the reason I did that is when you look at a picture, it stays put. But the auditory, verbal information does not. It's gone. Either you got it or you didn't. And then if you say, excuse me, Mr. Wonderful, highly educated teacher, could you repeat that for me, please? She might. And another one who doesn't understand might say, you need to listen more carefully. But I was listening. I didn't get it. Ask your friend. So we have to be alert to the fact that you don't get to keep this. All right? Now, take a look at the questions. You have 15 minutes. Time's up. All right. So if you're having difficulty answering the worksheet questions, folks, it might be because you're not able to process that visual information. You have a processing deficit that is not part of visual acuity, right? Because you can see the black and white blobs. You can see those different sections, right? I did it on purpose.
Oh, okay.
You can see those different sections. You can see that they just look like blobs. The problem is attaching meaning to those blobs, all right? Stare at it all you want. You can stare at it longer or have the teacher show you personally. It doesn't necessarily help. And the teacher may subsequently, because she doesn't know better, she hasn't been well enough trained, might chastise you for not having your worksheet complete, all right? It isn't that you don't understand the task. It isn't that you know you're supposed to answer these questions. It isn't that you don't understand the questions. You cannot make sense of the stimuli presented to you to formulate a response, can you? All right? So your frustration might be building because the kid sitting next to you is getting it, and the kid sitting in front of you is getting it, all right? And they hand in their worksheets, and you're sitting there, and you just might start dropping things on the floor, looking out the window, poking the kid next to you, taking off your sneaker and checking on your socks because they're new and you don't know what to do and you feel uncomfortable. Some inappropriate behaviors. Welcome to the world of processing difficulty. So what I'm going to do now is give you some strategies to help you process this visual stimulus. I'm going to give you some top-down information. All right, we're going to refer to top-down and bottom-up processing clues. So when you use top-down cues, as you're looking at this, you get the big picture, the gestalt, all right? And then you fill in the details. So, you ready? Here's a picture of an animal and a person. Now, some of you might have guessed that from the worksheet questions. Yes? All right. The animal is a horse. The person is a cow. Oh, I see it. The person is a cowboy. And the horse is standing in profile. So if the image suddenly popped out at you, then the cues provided the necessary orientation for you to listen carefully, to process or attach meaning to the visual stimuli. All right? To make sense of. Now, watch what happens. Now I'll give you a bottom-up. All right, next one. Now I'll give you a bottom-up. Here's a bottom-up. If you still can't make sense of it, we'll try some bottom-up cues. Now what the bottom-up processing does from the bottom up gives you details to help you fill in the image. So there, do you see? A is the cowboy's hat. B is the horse's head. And C is the horse's tail. All right? So now, the combination of cues, hopefully, we've got the top down and the bottom up, help you see the visual image. If not, you're probably really frustrated by now. Any of you having trouble figuring out, even with the top down or the bottom up? Yeah, there are some of you. Now, it's not my job to frustrate you, so let them see the whole shoot in that. And voila. Feel better now? The problem is everybody else got it before you. And that makes you feel emotionally uncomfortable. All right? So this was a visual processing task, ladies and gentlemen. A visual processing task. But it helps to illustrate for you some of the difficulties in an auditory processing task. All right? There are 5 of them for you to keep track of. So what I've just given you is an outline of what you're about to hear. You're going to hear 5 key points. The first is the problem is not the reception of the signal. That's what I did to this lady before. Now I'll turn it into English. The problem isn't that you can't see it. You can. The problem is not the reception of the signal. That's fancier language. It's what I did for this lady before. In Down and Dirty, the problem isn't that you can't see it. Your eyes are fine. Clean your glasses, not an issue. You can see. Okay? Well, you can see the visual image, no doubt, right? Your eyes receive the signal and taken it into your brain for processing, for making sense of. The difficulty occurred after the signal was received, and the same is true for auditory processing. The same is true for auditory processing. We are not talking about boys and girls who have hearing problems. It's not a question of auditory acuity. Suddenly, you are all a big, blurry mess. All right? Now I no longer have an acuity problem. If I had a hearing problem, I would wear hearing aids. This is not an acuity problem. This is what it is. The difference is this: with processing problems, the person with the processing problem can't make sense or attach meaning to the signal that's received. The same way you couldn't tell that that was a cowboy on a horse, though you could see it. Yes?
I'm sure you're going to get to this, but can you make sure to weave in why a recommendation for a child with an auditory, person with an auditory processing disorder might be to have an FM system, a system that enhances hearing? Because that does seem to go towards the auditory part, not the processing part.
I will get there, and I'm actually going to demonstrate it to you. You'd be shocked to find out the following: that the FM system to which this woman is referring is an amplification system. It makes it louder because there is a lot of ambient noise in classrooms, and there are multiple kinds of auditory processing problems, and for children who have difficulty in background noise, and we're going to do it in here in a little while. The amplification changes the ratio of the primary signal, the teacher's voice, to the background noise. That's why. It's not an acuity issue. It's dealing with the background noise. And by the way, all you have to do is raise the volume a very small amount, a very small amount. See, if I step away from the mic and talk in the same voice, when I stepped away from the mic and spoke in the same voice was harder, especially for those far away. Right? This modest amount of amplification helps. And you know what? It helps everybody in the room, not just the kid with the auditory processing disorder. It enhances it. They don't have to work so hard. So if this mic dies, I have to work much harder to project my voice, and those folks in the cheap seats have to work much harder to make sense of what I'm saying. You see it all the time. For instance, if I ask all of you who wear glasses to take them off, all right? Take them off for a minute, please. And especially those of you who are at a distance, I'm telling you it's going to get harder to pay attention. It really will get harder to pay attention. Now I can tell you, you can put it back on. And that's the point. That's the point. Volitionally, we automatically, oh, this is, I can't, what? I'm putting it, you can't pay attention as well. But you see, if you have that kind of processing difficulty, you can't turn it on and off. Processing. The rate and efficiency with which you can take in and make sense of information. I can disrupt your visual processing, and I can also impact your auditory processing and your language processing by making you take your glasses off, by stepping away from the mic. I'm trying to figure out how to do this in ways that work for everybody, including me. All righty? So, the issue here is that it isn't about whether or not you can hear the signal. It's whether or not you can make sense of it. Whether or not you can understand the sounds that are being presented to you. So, for example, we had this happen the other day. You might overhear someone speaking in a foreign language. It happens, right? You might hear someone speaking in a foreign language that you don't know. And if the person is talking and you have a good ear for languages, you might be able to repeat what they say. But you don't know what it means. You're still getting the signal. You would not be able to respond because you don't have the meaning. For example, many years ago, my sons and I, our family was on vacation in the Caribbean, and I like to play with words and play with sounds, and one of my twin sons is facile at it as well. And so we were walking back from a restaurant to our hotel, and he looked up at me, must have been 8, and he said to me, "Mommy, ipala masamini. And I know the game, so I said to him, "No, fasamino lolo singa." And we continued that way. Do you hear the intonation? All right. He asked me a question. I responded, "Oh no, that's not happening. No way, buddy." And we kept doing this, and finally somebody said, "Excuse me, do you speak English?" And so Russ and I turned and looked at her and said, "Oh, of course. What language were you speaking?" She'd been listening to us, trying to figure out what language that was. And when I use that routine for different purposes, it is amazing to me the number of people who guess Portuguese. Anybody here speak Portuguese? I have no idea. You do? Sí. Embalamos a minha coada. Embalamos a minha coada. De toda a people lá, assim, é?
Mais ou menos.
That sounds like Spanish to me. All right. So it's not that you didn't hear what I said. You couldn't make sense of it. All right. The second. Remember there were 5. So the first is that the problem isn't reception. You can see it. The second is that repeating the signal is in fact minimally helpful. All right? Think about it this way. If the light is poor, too dim, the screen is dark, and you can't see the image well, it might in immediacy compromise your ability, right, to process what you are seeing. However, staring at it isn't necessarily going to help. It's only going to increase your frustration. Think of it with the glasses on and glasses off. So teachers who repeat the auditory stimuli, what they say, louder or several times alone, without helping the student who has processing deficits by breaking it into parts, by rephrasing. There's any number of things that teachers can do. By increasing the redundancy. That's a gorgeous piece of jewelry. I like your necklace. Jewelry like that necklace is very pretty. Now I've made a word sandwich that helps the kid get the jewelry and necklace are a combination. Because if I just say to you, I admire that piece of jewelry, jewelry makes me feel good whenever I see jewelry, but if jewelry is not registering, it doesn't help. How many times I repeat it, okay? Sometimes it takes the kid longer, all right? Let me ask you a question. Who was, and I want you to raise your hands, who was the first president of these United States and what was his name? You're kidding, nobody knows the answer. I am not making any political jokes. I'm not saying a blessed thing. Other than the fact that I was supposed to go to Delray Beach this weekend. But there's a problem because you know who will be in Florida and they close the airports. Other than that, I have no problem. All right. Who was the first president of the United States and what was his name? Don't call out, please. Raise your hands if you know the answer. Come on, the guy from Portugal raised his hand. All right, so now, part of what happens if you do that is I call on Lori, and she says, and all the rest of you are doing this, right? And Lori can see all the rest of you doing this. And if she can't get it out, somebody else gets called. So while she is, I know I heard the question intonation, but what was that information? Oh wait, and I got to retrieve the answer too. And I know it. I got to find it, all right? So sometimes repeating isn't enough because the processing deficit happens after the signal, the information is received. It's what your brain does with it. Number 3, individuals, boys and girls, men and women, process stimuli in different ways. For some of you, the top down was great. That was enough. Others needed the bottom up. So I've been in school situations where a teacher will spend 3 months with a group of second graders helping them figure out what is the culture of their classroom. What are the components, the different behaviors, the different routines that comprise the culture of their classroom. And after the children have developed and derived that definition, then they learn about world cultures, about language, about religion, about rituals and the like. Some kids can't learn that way. Kids who have learning disabilities of certain kinds, kids who have language disorders of certain kinds, need to be told directly from the top down. A culture it has these components, so they have a structure already. So individuals learn in different ways. Some are great with the bottom up, others need the top down. So think about it. Think about if in fact I didn't give you the pictures with the ABCs and you needed that information and you couldn't figure it out from the other one, you might feel dumb or not very adequate in that classroom. And you're one of, I don't know, in some classes in which I consult there are 8 kids, and in some there are 18, and some there are 26. So it's harder for me to see each and every one of you, and to see each of your reactions, and to be responsive to each of your reactions. Number 4, the cues provide the orientation. They don't provide the answer. Think about that. The cues provide the orientation, not the answer. We use context to assign meaning. Alrighty? You have to know the context in which those words are being used. How many of you have seen the movie Arrival? And that's an interesting point because it's Amy Adams, who is a linguist, who deals with these not foreign nationals, but intergalactic. They're aliens. And part of the problem is they don't have a context for our experience, for what the words mean. So if you take a youngster who has no background information, doesn't have a context, and we talk about something that is unfamiliar, he can't rely on experience or prior knowledge, and he has to process the information, it's that much harder. You have to have context. They provide, the cues provide an orientation, they do not give you the answer. And the 5th is that processing, taking in and making sense of information, occurs on top of basic knowledge. It occurs on top of basic knowledge. The problem that you had with those worksheet questions wasn't because you didn't know what the pictured animal was or what the person was, all right? Processing is not an acuity, a hearing problem, like deafness or being hard of hearing. I see you. It's also not a basic language acquisition problem, though it can language. The language knowledge has been acquired. It can't be easily accessed because the information isn't readily available, okay? The signal isn't meaningful. Ingala pasanola. You hear me, but the signal isn't meaningful because you don't have any knowledge of the mommy and Russell. I see your hands. The mommy and Russell fake language. Listen carefully. Processing requires a person to use basic auditory and language skills. Auditory plus language skills to complete a more complex task, which is understanding, comprehension. All righty? Yes, there were two questions here. Taking in and making sense of what you hear. And you had a question, there was another, yes, sir.
Delayed speech in children.
Will you start again, please?
Delayed speech in children.
Is that?
Linked potentially in any way to auditory processing?
So the question the gentleman is asking is delayed speech in children in any way potentially related to an auditory processing disorder? So the first thing I will tell you is, and I want you to be very alert to this, because this use of language is very important. Very important. The distinction between speech and language is as follows. Speech is part of the larger language system. If I have delays in speech development, I am having trouble making my sounds clearly and articulately so that you can understand what I'm saying. Here's some normative information for you. Your average 2-year-old should be intelligible, understood by an unfamiliar listener about 60% of the time. Your average 3-year-old, and remember that's 36 to 48 months, your average 3-year-old should be intelligible to an unfamiliar listener, meaning not you or daddy or mommy, but grandma who shows up from Point South, who doesn't talk to him all the time, about 75% of the time. And by the time you're 5 or so, you should be intelligible to an unfamiliar listener, somebody who isn't used to what you're talking about and the way you talk, about 95% of the time. So, who was it? Was it Bugs Bunny? No. Which one had the terrible R, W for R substitution? Who? Elmer Fudd. All right. So here's a problem for you. Now I have less clear speech. Do I not? I won't make it so bad that you can't understand me, but I have less clear speech. Now, some of the folks have heard me tell this story before, and it's important for you to appreciate, because among the latest sounds to be mastered are the R and the S and the L. R and L are actually they're cousins. They're related to each other. And some of the THs. My twin sons, I chose one name. His father chose the other. It was a bloody battle. I won in the end, of course, because the name chosen was Russell. And I said, are you trying to ruin me? I have a reputation. I can't have my kid walking around saying, hi, I'm Wathu. I'm dead. Well, now I'll never make another penny in my life. So Wathu became Rusty. because those were easier to say. That's speech. My mother, now keep in mind, I'm from Brooklyn, so there she's my mother, all right, wanted me to put him in speech therapy because he loved me. He loved me very much. But I knew that someday he wouldn't love me, he would love me. And so he did. That's speech. I can give myself a lisp. I can give myself a W for awe substitution. I can do that terrible, terrible thing they do when they can't say truck. All right? But I won't. We're in a house of God. All right? That's speech. That's speech articulation. There's another aspect of speech that you are relying on enormously, which are the rhythm patterns that I use. I can talk in pure nonsense and you'll tell me whether I'm asking you a question, making a comment, giving you a command, using commas or periods. No doubt. That's speech. The bigger system is language. And most of the time when I hear people say that a child has a speech delay, they mean a language delay. And by language we mean the way in which we select and use words in sequence, in sentences, and in sequences of sentences to communicate effectively our intended meaning. And I can do that with a god-awful articulation problem, like a W for awe substitution. Because what I can do with that, I can give myself a lisp. I can give myself a terrible lisp. Barbara Walters has a nasty R problem. So there are, when you talk about speech delay, my hypothesis is most of the time people mean language delay. I have known children with significant language delays whose speech is perfectly clear. So the answer to your question is, could it potentially be related to an auditory processing problem? And the answer is yes. But by and large, auditory processing is not effectively evaluated and validly evaluated until children, some people say 4, but you get a lot of false positives, and most people say 7 or so. Because the reality is that neurological development is ongoing. And you will get false positives in identifying 4-year-olds. Not everybody agrees, but the tasks are incredibly hard, incredibly hard. Does that answer your question, sir? To differentiate the speech from the language and the demands of auditory processing. I need you to speak up because the hum is...
Using speech or language at all.
He's 2 and he's not using speech or language at all. Okay, so what I'm going to say is this. I cannot answer any question about a child upon whom I have never laid eyes. Too generic. I will, however, be happy to chat with you privately afterwards and give you some guidance as to what to do. The first thing to do, and this is for anybody and everybody, except the grandparents, because your children aren't going to listen to you, so tell somebody to tell them. All right? I have a colleague who's a developmental pediatrician. She has grooves over here where she's doing her work. All right? Get his hearing tested. That's the first order of business whenever there is a delay in language. Get the hearing tested. Get the hearing tested. All righty? Is there another question before I go on to the remaining 78 pages, of which I have gotten to 2? Yes.
Does the bilingual have any relation with auditory processing, especially if the child was predominantly a non-English speaking child for the first couple years of her life?
Let me get to the definitions of what auditory processing is. What you're talking about is language processing. When a child is bilingual or multilingual, if that child is neurologically intact and a capable, unencumbered learner, I have known children to speak multiple languages, and know to whom to speak in French, Italian, and Hebrew. All right? To whom, all right? There's no question that they know how to differentiate. Remember interaction of your what you say and how you say it and why you say it, the kids figure out the social emotional dynamic. As human beings, it is all about language because that's how we connect one to the other. And what we have to keep in mind is for our boys and girls, we are using language to teach language to children who may have impaired language systems. And all of school is language-based, and that includes art and phys ed. You know why? Because teachers give instructions, and children are asked questions. Another question? Yes, ma'am.
I have one. Well, it sounds like how can kids learn in school if they have auditory processing disorder? I mean, do you recommend any accommodations or
Sure,
private school,
let's
or-
talk about what the auditory
What's the
processing
solution?
disorder is, so you know what it is.
Okay.
And then we'll talk about accommodations, all right? We will then talk about accommodations. So, what you have to keep in mind is that auditory processing is related to language processing, and there's a combination. From a language therapist point of view, we are looking at top down. Do you have the whole? And I can help you see the parts. We don't process just the sounds. We process the combinations of the sounds that lead to words, that lead to sentences, that communicate meaning and intention. All right? We use our knowledge of language to interpret what we are hearing, the signal that we are hearing. How many of you are in a position where your hearing isn't what it used to be? And it's very strange. It's a very, I swear to God, I heard what you said. It just didn't make sense because why would you say it that way? Only to realize that I have not fully heard what you said. And my brain is then saying to me, whoops, I didn't get that signal right. Now, from an audiologist's point of view, it's a bottom up. What are the little pieces that lead to the larger whole? Think of it the way I said it before in terms of culture. The language therapist says, this is what a culture is from a language point of view. These are the component parts of the culture. An audiologist will say, let's look at all the different nuances and figure out the pieces and build from there. Why? Because you're talking about pure neurology of the acoustic signal, of the sound signal, all right? In reality, there's a combination of the two. You have to be able to make sense of the sounds that I'm saying to lead them into words, and you have to have background knowledge. When I give a talk like this, as Dr. Soifer, the university professor, it doesn't sound this way. I'm talking to people that I know don't have professional, oh wait a minute, where are the speech and language pathologists? Who else? 2. Anybody else? Get up here. 3, get up here. Why am I doing this alone? There's a difference. They are making sense of this, these 3 professionals, in a very different way. You know why? Because they have different background knowledge. They do. Am I correct, ladies? They're connecting it to something else. So we're talking about a combination. So here, let me give you auditory processing. There's a definition for you. Is the efficiency, how efficiently and how effectively the central nervous system, your neurology, uses auditory sound information, and the skills involved in auditory processing involve these aspects: localization and lateralization, discrimination, the ability to listen with both ears and temporal or time processing. All right. So, where it says sound localization and lateralization, you have to determine the source. Where is the sound coming from? All right. From which direction is it coming from? So if your kid is rotten at Marco Polo in the swimming pool, it might be diagnostic. All right. Where is the sound from? Where is the sound emanating? You have to look in the direction of the sound. I have seen kids many times in schools that are special education schools for children with language learning disabilities who do not alert to the direction of the sound. All right. Now, auditory discrimination. This is the ability to perceive the very subtle differences in similar sounds in a language. For instance, whether it's similar sounding words or an appreciation of tone of voice. I'll give you an example. There are certain populations of, anybody here from the Midwest? Wisconsin, Michigan? Oh, you know why? Because in the Midwest, those of you who are writing, write these 3 words. The woman's name, Mary, M-A-R-Y. What we wish people at holiday time, Merry Christmas. And when someone you love drops to his knee and says, will you marry me, M-A-R-R-Y. Those are 3 different vowels. But in the Midwest, they are all pronounced the exact same way. Right. So it's, all right, it's Merry Christmas, will you marry me? And there's Mary. Nice to see you. They can't discriminate the difference. Some people can't discriminate the difference between pin and pen. It sounds exactly the same to them. So discrimination is being able to hear, make the distinction between two sounds. It also matters from a pragmatic point of view. All right? Watch. I'm going to do it over here. Hi, how are you? Now watch. Hi, how are you? I just said the same words, but I changed the tone, and therefore I changed the meaning. You know where that gets kids? Where did you get that? Oh my gosh, where did you get that? As opposed to, ew, where did you get that? Where did you get that? The first one is a compliment, and the second one is an insult. You have to be able to discriminate the intonation pattern and the intent. It's part of a larger language system. And then there is the notion of dichotic listening, all right, like divergent, the die, using both ears to transfer information to the brain and tolerating competing signals, background noise. It's hard to listen in a noisy setting. I don't know about you, but I can't read in Grand Central. It's just too noisy for me. So being able to, the information goes in this ear, gets to that side, goes in this ear, gets to that side, to make them come together. And some kids who have trouble doing that are really thrown off by background noise. And then there's temporal processing. These are being able to discern, to discriminate the timing factors in an acoustic signal. For example, we don't talk in words. We don't talk in words. We talk in breath groups, and we don't say all of the sounds in each word. Anybody else here from Brooklyn? Jeet yet? Jeet yet? You know that one. But you would write that as D-I-D space Y-O-U space Y-E-T question mark. Nobody writes J-E-E-T Y-E-T. Jeet yet? Oh, by the way, that T doesn't get exploded. Jeet yet? Not Jeet yet? So those kinds of processing, temporal processing, processing the time distance between each of the sounds varies the way they're produced. Yes?
So I really appreciate the neurological
Yeah.
perspective that we're looking at this from. So I'm wondering, do you have to be born with this, or can a kid develop this later on? And I guess I'm kind of trying to tease out nature versus nurture. So can like, know, there's a lot of research that talks about the effects on the brain, on adolescents' brains, with extended screen time. Let's say extensive gaming, social media, YouTube, all these quick screens. Can that induce some of this?
I'm going to make two comments. The answer is I do not know. I just don't know the answer to whether or not the screen use, the bloody headphones that they all wear. I will direct you to a book by Catherine Steiner Adair, Adair, called The Big Disconnect, who writes extensively, Dr. Adair writes extensively about the impact of the use of computers and screen time. I will also direct you to a book by Dr. Terry, with an I, not a Y. We'll talk about spelling another night. Bellis, B as in boy, E-L-L-I-S. And Dr. Bellis has written one of the most available books for parents entitled, and this is what auditory processing is about, When the Brain Can't Hear, by Terry Bellis. So because it's neurological in nature, and because there's an ongoing developmental process, the tasks of an auditory processing evaluation are very challenging, really hard to do. But I don't know the specific answer to your question.
So backing up from the whole screen exposure, how about a kid who seemed like they didn't have any issues, and for whatever reason, could it express itself more, 12, 13, 14? Or is that likely something else? Is it that they had
My sense is that it's likely something else. It's very likely something else.
It usually will show.
Yes. It will manifest itself much earlier than that. What we've been seeing more and more is children showing up in centers for evaluation. You may know that I was the director of the Soifer Center for Learning and Child Development for many years, 25 years. And one of the things that we saw in the last several years were children coming much older than they had ever presented before. We saw fewer and fewer younger children. Why? Because the expectations for them in school were such that, and the way special ed is perceived, that it wasn't until they got as far as the 7th grade when they could not do that level of work because they had not really been able to do everything fully before. And the deficit had accumulated to the point that the children really couldn't perform. So if you are familiar, the language therapists will know of Bashir and Singer, Anthony Bashir and Bonnie Singer, who wrote years ago about what they described as the language problem that goes underground. And that's more and more and more of what we are seeing now. Now we're talking now not about auditory processing, but one of the potential impacts of auditory processing problems, which is you get a little kid, like a 2-year-old, who doesn't talk on time, and so he gets some early intervention, and he starts to talk, and the language delay goes underground. And he's adorable, and he's cheerful, and he's friendly, and he gets some services through early intervention, and then through CPSE, as we call it in Westchester, and then he gets to kindergarten, and he's okay, because he did well enough. And then he goes to the 1st grade, and he can't learn to read very well. So he gets some intervention, and the language problem goes underground, all right? And then he learns to decode, and then he gets to the 4th grade, but his comprehension is weak, so he gets some services, gets some help, he gets a tutor, and the language problem goes underground. Why? Because his speech is clear and he's a good kid. And then he gets to the 7th grade, and whoops, he's having trouble with the increasing demands of nonfiction, with the increasing demands of writing, with the shifting from class to class, and the language problem comes up, and this time it bites him right on his nose. In contemporary testing, there are 5 domains of testing, and each one of those domains, those areas, has multiple subtests. So the range of average intellectual ability is from 90 to 109, and then it extends from 80 to 90 is low average, from 110 to 119 is high average, When you get below the 80, it gets harder to understand complex instructions. When you get below 70, that area in there is called borderline. You're not within the average range, low or general average, and you're not intellectually deficient. These instructions, these tasks are challenging to do. Yes.
So if you have ADD, would that be the reason why you have auditory processing?
It could
or
be.
Can you have both?
Yes. You can have both, but this is an ongoing discussion when you try and test kids with attention deficit disorders, how hard it is to attend. Yes.
You referenced the psychoeducational evals, and you referenced like, for instance, the 70,000 test. We have like a visual, spatial, and another subtest that are visual, and the kids don't grade. But the problem with sight eval is a lot of the directions are given verbally. And so they have a child and they're giving them verbally and they're responding, not responding verbal, but then they're getting like in the, 80 percentile in like the visual, spatial, or the problem solving, for instance, off the boards, but anything that was given verbally, it's in like the 1 percentile. And the overall average will happen to, and when we finish that lab, will turn into a 70.
Well, there's a couple of things to say to that. One is the test to which I was referring when I spoke to this gentleman about the 5 domains is what is considered the gold standard of psychological testing, the Wechsler scales. All right. So there are 3 Wechsler scales, and that's not WEX, it's WECSLER. The Wechsler scales are considered the gold standard. All right. They are massively normed and renormed, and they're updated all the time. There are 3 levels. There is the Wechsler Preschool and Primary Scale of Intelligence, called the WIPSI, and that's given to kids up to the age of 6. And then there is the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children. Now it's in its 5th edition, and that is given to children from 6 through 16. That has the 5 domains. And then there is the WACE, the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, and that is from 16 through adulthood. So for school-age children, the most commonly used one would obviously be the WISC. The 5 domain scores, I'm going to answer your question. The 5 domain scores, it used to be verbal comprehension and perceptual reasoning, and then working memory and processing speed. Now you have verbal comprehension, visual, perceptual, fluid reasoning, and then working memory and processing speed. The first 3 are said to represent what is your innate intellectual ability. It's the simplest way to represent it. And the working memory and processing speed are designed to be support systems for your ability to reason, problem solve, and think. Each of those domains has multiple subtests within them. When you have significant discrepancies between and among the scores, so nobody knows what their verbal IQ is. People do not. They know their full scale IQ. When there is a significant discrepancy between and among the domain scores, the full scale IQ becomes less of a meaningful statistic. So let me give you an example, for instance. If we'll just do like the verbal comprehension and the perceptual, the visual perceptual, and turn that into an IQ score, just to give you a general sense. Let's say that for the sake of argument, Michaela's IQ is 100 and my IQ is 100. Except that my verbal IQ is 150 and my visual spatial IQ is 50, which in my case is probably true. All right? I have very much difficult, I have a great deal of difficulty reading maps, for instance. I have to turn them around. I can't reverse things in my head. I got us all over the place, but I have to rotate the map because it has to be pointing in the direction I'm walking, or I get confused left and right. The flip side is Michaela, who has a verbal IQ of 50 She doesn't understand easily, she doesn't use words in an effective way, her knowledge of words is weaker, the different concepts she can communicate are limited. But her visual spatial IQ, you give this kid a puzzle. You ask her to figure out how things go together. She got 150 IQ. Her full scale IQ is 100. You do not teach Michaela and Lydia the same way, but we have the same IQ. However, there is another score. So when I ask you your IQ, if you know it, you'll tell me my full scale, you'll tell me the score called your full scale IQ. There's something called a GAI, a General Abilities Index, which is a different form of calculation when you have huge discrepancies. That takes into account those discrepancies. Alrighty. Now, keep in mind that every part of this testing is verbally oriented. All of it.
So how do you get an accurate reading?
You have to have a psychologist who really knows.
Because how do you get an accurate reading of Michaela's verbal comprehension when she doesn't, and how well she is able to?
Because there are ways to phrase the questions. There are other forms of the test where you can give them multiple choice. There are other forms of the test for exactly that poor kid. And then there are other measures, like for instance, the test of nonverbal intelligence that allows you to investigate the child's reasoning abilities without relying on the verbal skills. All of that said, school is about language. And if your verbal skills, if you're very language impaired, and your verbal skills are so poor that you have trouble taking those tests, there's an issue at hand there. Yes?
So to help that scholar, the accommodations in a 504 and IEP or something like that at school would then be helpful to a child like that.
I say again that,
Sorry, you said earlier you talked about accommodations in school, either through a 504 or an IEP.
Right.
That would be helpful to a child like that.
Sure.
No matter what the test is, or the results of the
you
test.
have to have a psychologist who knows how to interpret those results. And please keep in mind that this is a very important distinction, that school-based testing is to determine eligibility. It is not, and it is not intended to be, diagnostic in nature. That you do not get in the public system. It's not their task. The testing is done to determine eligibility. Am I correct, ladies? That's the purpose. That's different than diagnostic testing. Diagnostic testing is, and it depends who you're going to, diagnostic testing is designed to say, what is this child's overall cognitive profile and why does he look that way? How does this cognitive profile relate to his academic abilities? And which tests am I using? Because if I use tests that have multiple choice all the time and you're not allowed to look back versus tests that are more open-ended and you are allowed to look back, I have to give multiple forms of reading, spelling, writing, math tests to understand the way this child uses his or her intellectual ability, not one. And then there's the emotional functioning as well. Because how resilient is the child? All right. I've seen kids, I say this to parents, I've said it many, many times. I've watched this happen. I have two kids. Same basic intellectual pattern. However, I present this to Susie, who looks at it and says, I'm not doing that, that's stupid. That's like for 8th grade, that's hard. And I present it to Mary, and Mary goes, whoa, that looks really like, that's hard, but okay, I'll try. I don't care that they have the same IQ. So that's what I mean. You have to keep answering, who is this child? All right? Who is this child? Boy, we're really talking about auditory processing. You got all kinds of questions now, don't you? All right. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because it's nearly 9. And the last time somebody fell asleep in front of me, it was very, very embarrassing. All right. So let's go ahead. Because I had to tickle that person and his Wife got mad as could be. So what we look at are, remember we've talked about the discrimination, the pattern recognition, the prolongation. How many of you have heard of fast forward? Oh yeah, so fast forward talks about the timing aspects of the signal. So for instance, when I was in graduate school, which I suspect is a long time before you were, we used to have to look at these things that looked like x-rays that were voice phonographs. And we had to read, you know, when you had a cardiogram, those, now picture that in a black and white x-ray form, and we had to look at them and figure out what sound was making that level of wiggles on the page. Because you know what? Some sounds are longer than others. We just don't recognize that. Unless we're on the South, where they tend to prolong their vowels. Well, don't do that up here. And there's a different cadence when y'all do that in there. Now, did I just say isn't there or in there? You don't know. But in that context, it doesn't mean in there. All right? I did that in New Orleans several years ago and caused a near riot. First I did my Brooklyn accent, and then I did this faux Southern accent, and people started bashing each other going, what is that? That Arkansas? That ain't Arkansas, that's Kansas. That ain't Kansas, that's Missouri. It's made it up, I made it up. So let me show you a little bit about some of these. All right, now, the sound localization matters. You know why? Because children no longer readily sit in rows and aisles with the teacher in the front and the whiteboard. All right? So what I'm going to ask you to do, would you hold these for me? Close your eyes, please, all of you. Kindly point in the direction of my voice. You got it. Uh-oh, somebody doesn't. Be careful. All right. Put your hands down. Kindly point in the direction of my voice. Yes, you can localize, can't you? But if you can't, then your response to the vocalization is going to be delayed, which will cause you to miss some information. And you'll note that I took my shoes off as well. Not simply because I got a pedicure the other day, but because I didn't want to scuff and give you a signal. All right? There's one. Auditory discrimination in or competing or degraded signals. You ready? I want you on this side of the room to kindly sing in the tiniest voice, each of you in your tiny voice, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." And on this side of the room, I'd like you in your tiniest voice, but each of you, to sing "Happy Birthday." All righty? Please. All right, now I can amplify the signal by the microphone, but in your classroom, you don't have an amplified signal. And if there's a constant background noise like that, you have to listen. You may stop. Don't sing publicly again. So imagine then what happens if there's that background noise, or a white noise machine, or the hum of the fluorescent lights, and you are sensitive to it. So there's an issue of degraded signal. There's, you know, sometimes the auditory, the noise of the air conditioning units can be disturbing to some people. Some don't hear it. I recently have been in a situation where I'm having some trouble falling asleep. Once I fall asleep, I'm fine. And I finally realized what it was. There's a beautiful old clock that was given to me as a gift many years ago, and I just moved it into my bedroom. It had been in my office, and it does this. Every single second. And it's been keeping me up. It now is in my lingerie drawer, all right? Because I can put it up every morning, but I can't. And for some people, that rhythmic ticking would put them right to sleep. It keeps me awake. And it took me a little while to figure out what it was. Auditory discrimination tests look like this. Can you hear the difference? I'll do it to these folks right here. Can you hear the difference between two sounds? You ready? I'm going to say two words to you. I would like you to tell me if they're the same or different. All right? And then I cover my mouth. You know why? Because she can't read my lips. Because whether you realize it or not, you get a lot of information. The other night, we were watching Jeopardy, and I said to my son, she got the right answer because it started with a V. And I watched her go, and there it was. All right, so you ready? Fun, fun. Same or different? Man, man. Jump, jump. There's a noise here. You ready? Boy, boy. Thy, thy. Oh, if you could see her face. Now, two things happen here. The last pair was not the same. It was thy. That's why your face has to be discovered. Thy and thy. That's from the Whitman test of auditory discrimination. The second thing that happens is I created a set for her. The first 5 were the same. Then she had to shift sets. That's part of your executive functions, of being able to shift. You know, when your kid does the first 3, first 4, first 5 arithmetic problems and they're all addition, and then the teacher puts in the subtraction one, your kid knows how to do the subtraction, but that sign is not part of his consciousness. And he adds it. I've watched kids get suckered after multiple choice tests where they get 3 B's or 3 C's in a row and suddenly start writing all B's. All right? So it's got an executive function piece as well. And then there's the auditory pattern recognition. You talking to me? You talking to me? You talking to me? You talking to me? Which is the pattern. Please tell me I do not look like Robert De Niro. All right. And then the temporal aspects of audition. The faster I speak, the harder you have to work. Because the words flow together that much more quickly. It's harder for you to manage. Okay? So there's another one. Let's go to the next one. All righty. These are characteristics of auditory processing disorder in more general terms. You got to have normal hearing. You've got to have some degree, we'll see, difficulty understanding speech and language through the auditory channel when you're not reading, because language is also writing. The literacy is based on oral language. Oral, English is such a challenging language. Oral, O-R-A-L, and oral, A-U-A-L, A-U-R-A-L. All right? So the foundations of literacy are in oral language. Difficulty in any listening situation where there is less than an optimal environment. All right? So just think of all those. Do you know how many, they now sell these. I was in a school today at which I'm consulting, and there was a box called chair shoes. And what it was, we used to put tennis balls on the bottoms of chairs. Now they make them, so you don't have to split the tennis balls, and you can just put them, they're called chair socks, and you just slide them on the bottom of the chair. Do you know why? Because the chairs scrape on the tiles. And if you've got rooms that are not carpeted, that have linoleum or plastic tiles, and windows, sound bounces off and creates echoes. I was at the Thistlethwaite Nursery School up in, I think it's Katona, and their floors are made of bamboo. So the sound gets absorbed and it doesn't bounce and echo. If there's any background noise, air conditioners, flickering lights, fans, kids scraping. I watched a kid who was got a new FM system, except that the teacher had the door open in the classroom, and it's on the main hallway of the school. So it only makes it harder. Acoustic filtering, that's the experience we have on the cell phone. All right? That my name, my children laugh all the time. May I have your name, please? Yes, it's Soifer. S is in Sam, O-I, F is in Frank, E-R. My kids could do that before they could spell their first names. All right? Why? Because S and F sound the same on the telephone. B and P sound the same on the telephone. All righty? That's what we mean by acoustic filtering. Those distinctions are lost in the electronics of our phones. Rapid speech, you lose part of the sounds. That's what GPN is. All right? And then there's completing signals. When there's multiple speakers. How many of you have been in a bar lately and there's music or a lot of people talking? That's what a competing signal is. All right? When kids have auditory processing difficulties, they may have some combination of difficulty in all of these characteristics. This is what I've been describing to you. They have normal hearing, but you get a lot of, huh? Oh, I'm sorry, were you talking to me? But it's very hard to discern if that's attention in some instances, all right? The difficulty with the auditory localization, I just did that with you. That's why golfers yelled 4, all righty? And we had a dark wood table in our dining room. We had a white cat. And one of her whiskers was on the dining room table. And I said to my son, "Oh, that's Emma's whisker." To which he said, "Mommy, the cat can't whisper." All right? Now, we're talking about whispering and whiskers. We are not talking about medieval times, the Renaissance, the House of Commons, the Crimean War. We don't talk about that stuff at dinner. It's a different context. Those are unfamiliar words. It requires greater levels of attention, discrimination. All right? Deficiencies in remembering the sounds, that's what the phonemes are. And so when kids are learning in phonics readers, it's hard to tell if Nat was a fat rat or a fat cat. All righty? So please, go ahead. How many of you remember Bergdorf Goodman's? For those of you who don't remember Bergdorf Goodman's, I rarely went into Bergdorf because the salespeople were better dressed than I was. And it was very, very elegant. It was all gray marble and glass. Very elegant, very limited stock, none of which I could afford. Everything about it was very, very subdued and elegant. And one of the women said, one of the parents said to me, "I can take him into Bergdorf's, I can't take him into Bloomingdale's." Because Bloomingdale's was overwhelming. There was too much. Hard when there's background noise. That's what we did before. If you have a weak auditory memory, it's going to be hard, even if you can discern it, to hold on to it. All right? And poor listening skills. I cannot teach you to hear, but I can teach you to listen. I can teach you which are the key words to which to attend. I can teach you how to identify pause patterns. I can't teach you to hear. And I know kids who are anxious who the minute you get the first 3 words out of your mouth, the child says, "I don't get it. I don't get it." And that immediately says to me several things. I'm nervous from him. "Lady, you're talking too fast." 2, he needs a multi-sensory approach. But you can have any of these. Difficulty understanding rapid speech or dialect. When a person has an accent and you're not accustomed to listening to that form of accent, it's a little bit harder to process it, don't you think? All right, and I can do this in multiple ways. That's my lousy probe. Okay. I can do it in French. Anybody, I'm insulted because I'm doing it in French. Do you know how hard it is to listen to somebody like this? Yeah. Yes, there was a question.
Would you find that you needed to develop a different...
Say again?
Would you find that you needed to develop a different protocol when you needed to address anxiety with the processing problem?
Sure.
Yeah. And you just work it in together?
You have to. As I have trained generations of language therapists and generations of special ed teachers and generations of psychologists, which is inconceivable to me given that I'm 27. I make it gray. It looks like highlights. And I tell them that never, ever, ever under any circumstance that I can imagine in a language teaching that only one goal is worked on. You work on multiple. So today I'm working as a consultant, a language and literacy consultant to a special ed school. I do this in multiple schools, not all of which are special education schools. And I was pointing out to this young teacher how many different things, how many different goals were being achieved by the way I had her presenting the information and responding. So, and finally, when you get a lot of requests for repetition and you know the kid's hearing is normal. Yes?
You said for listening skills, you were saying that multi-sensory approach would be needed. Can you explain what that means, please?
So when we teach in a multi-sensory way, for instance, I can give you a very concrete example, which is, and to say that, for instance, when you're teaching in an Orton-Gillingham methodology, which is the way children are taught to read who have specific reading disabilities, it is a multi-sensory approach. That means you see it, you hear it, you say it, you feel it. So we might be teaching children letters of the alphabet or the sounds, and they will skywrite them while they say them. Now, for certain kinds of auditory processing challenges or language processing challenges, you provide the support of the visual. For other kids who can't process a lot of information at once, you don't want to bombard them with too much information. You must be able to answer the question, who is this child? And how must I teach this child? That's what, quote, differentiation is supposed to be. Differentiation is not always that. Okey-doke. All right, so here's what we need to know as a rule. Auditory processing disorders are heterogeneous. They're made up of lots of parts. When audiologists look at them, they look at the discrete, neurologically based parts. They can affect you in different ways depending upon your intellect, depending upon the nature of your language, depending upon what demands are placed to you. And they cannot be diagnosed in isolation. They have to be part of a larger evaluation process. And I really can't stress that, because diagnosis and involves also the psychoeducational evaluation and the language evaluation. So we know what the other components of the kid's language system are. All right? And we know what the components of the child's intellect are, all the patterns involved in them. Please go to the next. I'm trying not to rush too badly, but it's also rather late. ASHA also tells us, all right, it is expected that a simple 1-to-1 correspondence, this is really important, between deficits in fundamental, discrete auditory process and language learning and related sequelae may be difficult, if not possible, to demonstrate. In English, what that means is you can't find a spot, and you can't prove that, because language is multifaceted. Learning is multifaceted. An auditory processing disorder, if diagnosed, is part of another larger picture. It's not going to be the only cause of the child's difficulty. Yes?
Taking notes and listening are something my daughter has trouble with.
Yes.
At school, and I was told that's because it's auditory processing. Is that accurate?
I have two answers. Number one, I don't know your daughter, so I can't say. And I mean that sincerely. I don't know.
Maybe I phrased it wrong.
Sorry?
Maybe I phrased
No,
it.
no. But I also know that every single one of you who have been taking notes has been using multiple systems far beyond the auditory processing. And one of the most primary of those, another night I'll come talk to you about working memory. See, there's all different kinds of memory. Michaela, do you have brothers and sisters? How many?
One sister,
When is her birthday?
December 23rd.
So she gets no presents because it's right near Christmas. Okay. All right. Is your sister married?
Yes.
When is her anniversary, do you know?
Oh, I don't.
Are you married?
Yes,
When is your husband's birthday?
April 23rd.
And what is your anniversary?
February
Okay, congratulations. That is her autobiographical memory. All right? She knows the details. Now, let me test your informational memory. Who was the 16th president of the United States? Abraham Lincoln. What is the capital of France? Paris. That is your informational memory. How do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? How do you brush your teeth? That's your procedural memory. You have multiple kinds of memory. Short-term memory goes in and out. You ready? Would you repeat some numbers for me? 7139.
7139.
In her ear, out her mouth. Very little processing. But your working memory, oh, your working memory. You don't have a good working memory, you are in deep, deep trouble. People who don't have good working memory don't look nearly as smart as they actually are. Why? What is your working memory? Any one of you who is taking notes is dependent upon your working memory. Why? Because no matter how much I try to phrase carefully, to repeat myself, I talk faster than you can write. Which means that you have to hold what I said in your head and convert it onto the page. And by the way, you already know with enormous automaticity, and never underestimate the value of automaticity, with enormous automaticity, how to form those letters and spell those words. But when you're a kid, you may not have that automaticity. When you're a kid, who has some kind of language challenge, who has an attentional problem, who has a weak working memory, you may not know what the most important words are to put down. And the kids will say, you know what, like when I think of what I want to write, and then I have to remember how to make the letters and spell the words, and then I need to get it all down. You know, it's like too much, I can't hold on to it. So my spelling goes, or my handwriting goes, or I just write a little bit. Your working memory is your brain's Post-it note. And you will recall now that there are those little tiny Post-it notes that are tabs, and then there are those gigantic sheets, the flip charts that are Post-it notes. I don't know your daughter, but we have to keep in mind the working memory challenge. We have to keep in mind graphomotor challenges. We have to keep in mind the nature of the information being presented and how familiar it is, the rate at which it's being presented.
Be developed.
It depends, because I'm not exactly sure what it is. So do you see how virtually every question that you've asked about a child has a multi-part, multi-layered answer? Who is this child? Neurologically, by personality and temperament, and those 7 interactive parts: cognition, attention and executive functions, working memory, language, sensory, motor, academics, and emotional function. All right? Excuse me. All right. So what do? When you're diagnosing an auditory processing disorder, you've really got to do a multidisciplinary approach. All righty? You've got to take a look at from a speech and language and speech point of view, from a psychologist's point of view, and this is Bellis. This is not Lydia. This is Terry Bellis. All right? And what you have to do is look at language concepts, knowledge. You have to look at phonological awareness. You have to look at language and communication skills. At the cognitive level, you have to look at the other aspects of processing. How fast can the kid process overall? Motor processing, for example. You have to look at attention and the executive function. And I will talk about executive functions. and motivation. Some kids can't sit through these tests, all righty? You have to look from the audiologist's point of view at acuity. What's the kids hearing? At discrimination and pattern and two-ear listening, all the things we've talked about. You cannot give one or two tests ever. You are looking for patterns. You are looking for patterns. And to have a shot at establishing the patterns, you have to collect sufficient data. All right? This is not about test administration and score reportage. It's about data collection, analysis, and interpretation. That's a big deal. All righty? So, what you have to do is make sure that attentional problems are ruled out. The audiologists that I know and trust will say kids to ADD can't do the testing. You can't. They just can't. And by the way, I'm telling you, there are some people who are testing it for who are doing preliminary tests, but by and large, in terms of neurological maturation, really not before 7 or 8. And why would you test a kid's auditory processing if he's already getting better at the task that he can't do if he's getting services in school? All right, so I'm working with a little girl now who I'm doing a fair amount of advocacy work in addition. The little girl had language delays from early on, EI, early intervention. She then had services in school, has had significant difficulty learning to read. She has average intellectual ability. She is a frankly dyslexic child who has not been evaluated, not properly identified. She's in the 5th grade. She's reading kinda, sorta, at a 2nd grade reading level, so the deficit has accumulated. Alrighty, and now they're giving her 5 days a week of Orton-Gillingham instruction. Well, we had a problem. She feels really bad about herself. She's pulled out a boatload of times, and somebody in her school district said, wait, I think she may have an auditory processing disorder. It's not at this juncture going to help her learn how to read. And lo and behold, she has a very specific, narrow kind of auditory processing disorder which will be responsive to certain of the training, computer training programs. And you know what? It's not going to help her learn to read, because that's not where that's coming from. All right? And so you don't start with the auditory processing evaluation. You look at the big picture first. We're looking at a smaller part. Remember, that first level is neurological. Then it becomes language, sound. Then it becomes meaning. Just think of some of the tests that I asked you to do. All right? Can only be done. They can be screened, but they can only be formally tested. Many are language. Can I make sense of all the words, all the ideas, and the relationships between and among the words and ideas in the sentences? All right? The gentleman who was wearing the green jacket, who has black hair, and inquired about multilingualism, is wearing a white shirt. That sentence is the man is wearing a white shirt. In fact, that sentence is the man is wearing a shirt. You take out all those embedded clauses, and that's the basic sentence. Don't tell me that guy's got an auditory processing problem until we've analyzed his memory and his grammatical knowledge. Next one. Now I'm racing. All right, what do you do? Now, there are 3 things in general that you can do. There are some auditory, but remember there's different kinds of auditory processing problems, so you treat them differently. You need a good audiologist. You need a good audiologist. You can modify the environment, all righty? You can change the different environments in which eliminate background noise. Put mats on the floor so you don't have reverberation. Put chair socks, they look like tennis balls, on the bottoms of the chairs. I tell people that, and I say this in general, that we talk about auditory background noise, but some of the classrooms I go into, there's such visual noise, everything's hanging on clotheslines across the middle of the room, and there's a million pictures. You know, that part is distracting as well, making it hard for the child to listen. You really, 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 really want to keep the auditory environment as pure as you can. Acoustic ceiling tiles. I don't know how none of you went to the New York City public schools, but some of you might, oh, there you go. I remember thinking I was in North Avenue in New Rochelle in Westchester, and they converted one of the old public schools to apartments. Wow, that's fabulous. For an apartment, they're dreadful as classrooms because they have ceilings that are 20 feet high, and they have giant windows that the traffic noise comes through. So think about it. So at the Windward School here in White Plains in the lower school, the kids never need FM systems in that environment. The floors are carpeted, and it's on a cul-de-sac, and there are no houses on either side. There's no noise. The halls are carpeted, the classrooms are carpeted, and there are acoustic tiles in the ceilings. They don't need FM systems. Now, I've been in Rye Country Day School where every single room has an FM amplification system that comes out of the smart board. All right, so think about improving the lighting. All right, control the number of speakers at once, and put in lamps. Incandescent light where you've got flickering or buzzing, fluorescent lights. Alrighty, there's lots of things that you can do. You can use FM systems. The kids can have listening buddies, and we train the teachers in how to use their voices. No, we train each teacher in how to use his or her voice. That was excellent self-monitoring and evaluation and adaptation of my good executive functions and self-monitoring. We train the teachers to speak, how to parse, how to question, how to rephrase and reframe for the kid whose processing is difficult. All right, there's a lot that you can do to help in a classroom situation if you know. There's not a whole heck of a lot you can do if there's 26 kids in the class. And there's a lot of noise. And by the way, preferential seating does not mean in the front row. I've had teachers say to me, if I gave every kid preferential seating who needed it, I'd have all 26 of them in a row this way. And the reality is that the best seating, when a kid, they say he needs preferential seating, he should be in the front. It's not this row, it's that row. Because these people are under me. I can make eye contact with them, I have to look down to them. So it's the second row that's really preferential, not the first. You got a behavioral issue, you want that kid in the front row.
There are no rows anymore.
Well, don't get me started on that, or we'll never get home, all right? So we have to be alert to the way teachers use the volume of information, the way they phrase, the signal words that they use, the amount of wait time that they provide. Those are some of the things you can do to change the environment. But people have to be taught how to do that. I don't go into too many schools where the chairs are not modified now. You know that's done. I see lots of schools with FM systems. It depends on the nature of the auditory processing problem and how much it's impacted language. They are heterogeneous, not homogeneous. Okay, I'm going to talk about the compensatory training, and then now, this is, there are a lot of computer programs now that are available that can be used. There are several. You have to be taught how to use them, and you have to know when and how to use them. So the little girl to whom I was referring, she has a specific form of auditory processing disorder for which the audiologist who just tested her said, this will be responsive to this computer program. Please be careful in what you buy, because I'll tell you why. And you may think I'm jaded because I've been doing this for a long time, but I love what I do, and I have no interest in stopping. But this is one of the many things that I've learned over the years is that hope sells, and it sells at a remarkably high price. So think about the program that you're buying and make sure that it's designed to do what you need it to do, and that it actually does what it says it will do, which is why you don't go out and buy something off the internet until you talk to your kid's audiologist about what is the nature of the program it needs. All right, so I'm not naming names. The last thing I need now is to be sued, but be alert. Be alert, all right? So when it says compensatory training in auditory skills, you need a good language therapist. There's a couple of them here tonight, all right? And they have to work on speech sound discrimination, all right? On sound blending. It's called phonemic synthesis. The programs do a lot of this. They have to work on prosody, the rhythm training, all right? They have to work on localization training. There's so many things that you can do. Auditory figure ground, that's what you were doing before, when you have to listen to me when there's background noise. There are so many of these, and this is what a good language therapist will do. Localization, memory, sequencing. There's all different kinds of tasks. This is what a good language therapist will do. This is where a good audiologist will give you good programs to do these kinds of things, all righty? Now, you have to keep in mind at all times, is this auditory processing problem part of a larger picture of attention deficit, of executive function disruption, of language impairment, of anxiety, or is it all of the above? And how the devil do you treat them all? You treat them in sequence, where you're going to get, that kid's going to get the most bang for his buck. Because when you have all of those things going on, it's hard to focus on one thing and one thing only. And I mean this most sincerely. Be aware of very attractive but unproven treatments. Remember baby Einstein? I had a colleague who was convinced that if she played Mozart to her belly, which was carrying who eventually became her son, he would develop. So she played Mozart to her belly. He's a very calm boy, but he can't play music for dark. Next one. Now, here's where you need a great language.
Ma'am, one question?
Sure.
Real quick, on that topic. Your position on CogMed and its improvement on working on language.
I'm going to say I don't know enough. I haven't read enough. I will, to speak directly to CogMed. I do know, however, that all of these computerized programs are supplemental to good therapy and good teaching. That much I can say. We saw this with Fast Forward. We see it with many, many of these programs. You can, there's loads of them. There's loads of them. People are far more complex than any one program because you see, you don't use your memory in isolation. So I can't answer specifically about that program. All right. Hope sells. And I'm not taking a shot at that. I'm saying we are much more complex than you realize. Think of all the systems that you're using as you formulate that question and then listen to me. It's a lot going on, a lot. And programs tend to be controlled. Environments are not. And that's something to think about as well. How do you adapt?
Centers are pushing those.
Sorry?
Centers.
Which centers?
Southfield Center. Area. Pushing that program.
I will
It's an
call
expensive
Chris and ask
program.
him why. I don't know why. I don't know why. Okay? All right? So now you need a great language therapist who is going to do not just language training and the down and dirty of the previous slide, but who is going to deal with the higher level of thinking, of organizing, of executive functions and self-monitoring, of learning how to listen, of establishing, you'll have this all in the handout, the knowledge and the rules of language. This is at the highest level because the discrete levels may be disrupted, but there's a higher level that suffers as a result, and treating one without the other. This is learning how to learn. This is being cognitive, thinking meta, thinking about your own thinking, thinking about your own language, as well as language. And then there are the discrete tasks of the auditory processing first level that we discussed early on, the part that's called the auditory processing. Now, I want to end as I began. All righty? Now, I am going to give you some information, bottom-up style. I know that tonight we talked about auditory processing. We talked about a great many things, which tells me just how hard it is for parents and teachers to process the enormous complexity of what is in the research, of what is in the therapists. My job has always been, whenever we did evaluations at the Soifer Center, I would say to the parents, we're not here to report the results to you. We're here to teach you what we learned about your child and what you need to do about it. And if you don't understand the information that is being given to you by the clinician who just evaluated your child, then it's your obligation. You wouldn't let somebody smack your kid, would you? It's your obligation to say, I'm sorry, I don't understand what that means. Can you explain it to me in a way that I... And that means also at your PPT meeting. All right? Our job is to educate your child, and we're a team. So you have to think in terms of how much do I understand? Because you know what? He's only in school 6 hours a day. It isn't a very long 6 hours, but he's with you the rest of the time. So here's what I want to do. I've told you a lot. I haven't taught you a lot. We didn't have time for me to teach you. But I told you a lot. And I hope that for some of you it registered in a more robust way. I would never presume to say I was teaching this to you. I was presenting it to you so you have some information. And as I said, you'll take it home in different ways. But now I'm going to give you some bottom up. Again, you ready? A great American myth. Start formulating. You process that. Two handsome, devilish, but charming, irascible bandits. Now, some of you know irascible, and some of you are, what'd she say? All right. And a horse. And now this is clearly an age-related thing. Think Trigger, or Black Beauty, or the real old folks will remember My Friend Flicka. All right? That's if you want to cough up how old you are. I remember My Friend Flicka. So do you. All right. Now, getting a picture? You got a picture? A great American myth, two devilish, charming, but irascible bandits. A horse, think Trigger or Black Beauty. Got a picture? Now let me add this tidbit. Not old blue eyes, because that'll make you think Frank Sinatra, but electric blue eyes. Blue eyes to die for. And now you might get this picture of the horse and the cow. All right. There's the bottom-up approach. So perhaps if you could hear and even repeat all of those words, and if you knew what they meant, but had no idea who Paul Newman was, had no idea about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. None. You might not have been able to conjure up that image, even though you heard every single word and sound that I said. You need both sets of abilities. Auditory processing disorders do not exist by themselves. They are intertwined with the processing of language, with cognitive ability, especially attention and memory, and never, ever, for one split second, forget the emotional component and the personality component and the environmental components. So what I am going to do is make it clear that I believe that knowledge truly is power. Use your power on behalf of your child to represent. Ask a lot of questions, and if you become a royal pain, well, so be it. And my last suggestion to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that now you should go home and process all of this. Thank you.